Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how the same people keep getting taken advantage of? How certain individuals seem to navigate through life untouched by manipulation, while others, perhaps more intelligent, more qualified, more deserving, get exploited repeatedly? Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to admit. Approximately 70% of people believe they're harder to manipulate than average. Statistically impossible. But here's what's actually happening. Most people are living their entire lives as psychological prey. They've been conditioned since childhood to be compliant, agreeable, and vulnerable to influence. And while you're being told that kindness is strength and openness is virtue, there's a select group of individuals who understand something different. They've learned to construct a psychological fortress so impenetrable that manipulation slides off them like water off stone. Today, I'm going to share with you the hidden wisdom of Carl Jung, the man who decoded the human psyche itself, and reveal the 5 truths that will make you psychologically untouchable. By the end of this video, you'll understand why you've been vulnerable, and exactly how to change that forever. Think about the last time someone talked you into something you didn't want to do. Maybe it was a relationship that drained you, a business deal that favored them, or simply agreeing to something that violated your boundaries. You felt it in your gut, didn't you? That subtle warning signal is telling you something was wrong, but you ignored it. You rationalized. You told yourself you were being paranoid or overly suspicious. Here's what was really happening. You were being psychologically engineered. Your empathy was being weaponized against you. Your desire to be seen as reasonable was being exploited. Your fear of conflict was being used as a lever to move you exactly where someone else wanted you. And the worst part? This isn't random. You weren't just unlucky. You were targeted specifically because manipulators can sense psychological vulnerability, the way predators smell fear. They've identified patterns in your behavior, patterns you don't even know exist, that signal you're exploitable. The education system, social conditioning, and even your own family may have programmed you to be a perfect victim. They taught you to be nice, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to see the best in everyone. Noble sentiments that leave you defenseless in a world where psychological warfare is the norm, not the exception. But what if I told you there's a way to reprogram yourself? To develop what Jung called psychological sovereignty, a state where your mind becomes an impenetrable fortress that manipulation cannot breach. Carl Gustav Jung wasn't just a psychologist. He was an architect of human consciousness who spent decades mapping the darkest territories of the human mind. While Freud was obsessed with sexuality, Jung was studying something far more dangerous, the hidden mechanisms of power, influence, and psychological dominance that operate beneath conscious awareness. Jung worked with patients who had been psychologically shattered, people who had lost their minds to manipulation, trauma, and the machinations of others. Through treating hundreds of cases, he discovered something extraordinary. There are specific psychological structures that, when properly developed, make an individual essentially immune to external influence. He called it individuation, but that sanitized academic term doesn't capture the raw power of what he actually discovered. Jung found the psychological equivalent of a vaccine against manipulation. He identified the exact mental architectures that separate those who control their reality from those who have their reality, controlled for them. His work was so psychologically potent that it influenced everyone from CIA operatives studying interrogation, resistance to corporate strategists learning, negotiation dominance. The intelligence community studied Jung's principles because they understood something crucial. The person who cannot be manipulated cannot be defeated. What I'm about to share with you are 5 principles extracted from Jung's deepest work, truths that most people will never encounter because they require confronting uncomfortable realities about human nature and about yourself. Truth number 1. Jung's most revolutionary discovery was the shadow, the parts of yourself you've repressed, denied, and hidden away because society told you they were unacceptable. Your anger, your selfishness, your capacity for ruthlessness, your dark impulses. Here's what most people don't understand. When you deny your shadow, you don't eliminate those traits. You simply make them unconscious, which makes you vulnerable. Manipulators are shadow experts. They can sense when someone has disowned their capacity for aggression, their selfishness, their darkness. And that's exactly where they strike. They exploit the gap between who you think you are and who you actually are. The person who says, "I would never be cruel," can be manipulated through guilt. The person who claims, "I'm always rational," can be exploited through their emotional blind spots. The person who insists, "I'm a good person," will compromise their boundaries to maintain that identity. But when you integrate your shadow, when you acknowledge and accept that you are capable of cruelty, manipulation, selfishness, and darkness, something extraordinary happens. You become psychologically complete. Manipulators lose their leverage because you're not hiding from yourself anymore. Jung said, "Everyone carries a shadow," and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. Your integrated shadow doesn't make you evil. It makes you dangerous to those who would exploit you. It makes it impossible to guilt, shame, or emotionally blackmail. Truth number 2, you wear masks. We all do. Jung called this the persona, the social face you present to the world, the professional you are to work with, the agreeable you with friends, the duty you have to family. The persona isn't inherently bad. It's necessary for social functioning. But here's the trap. When you become identified with your persona, when you start believing you are that mask, you've created a manipulation vulnerability that's almost impossible to defend. Why? Because now your psychological survival depends on maintaining that image. And anyone who threatens to expose the gap between your persona and your reality has power over you. Think about it. How many times have you agreed to something because saying no would damage your nice person image? How many times have you been manipulated by someone threatening your reputation or social standing? How many times have you compromised your truth because the real you didn't match the persona you've constructed? Manipulators instinctively target your persona. They threaten to expose you. They suggest you're not living up to your own standards. They weaponize the gap between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. The solution? Hold your persona lightly. Understand that it's a tool, not your identity. Jung taught that psychological maturity means being able to put on and remove the persona consciously, wearing it when useful, discarding it when it becomes a constraint. When you stop being attached to your social masks, you become unmanipulable through reputation threat. You develop what Jung called psychological flexibility, the ability to be whoever the situation requires without losing your core self. Truth number 3. Here's one of Jung's most powerful insights. People don't see you. They see their own unconscious content projected onto you. When someone tries to manipulate you, they're actually revealing themselves. Their tactics expose their own fears, desires, and psychological wounds. They're showing you the exact blueprint of their internal reality, the person who constantly accuses others of lying. They're projecting their own dishonesty. The person who manipulates through guilt? They're projecting their own shame. The person who tries to control through fear? They're projecting their own terror of powerlessness. Once you understand projection, manipulation attempts become psychological X-rays. Instead of reacting to the surface-level manipulation, you can see through to the manipulator's core wounds and vulnerabilities. This creates an extraordinary advantage. While they think they're manipulating you, you're actually reading them at a level they don't even understand about themselves. You're seeing their shadow, their fears, their compensations. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But the inverse is equally true. Everything manipulators use against you reveals their own vulnerabilities. Develop this skill, and you transform every manipulation attempt into intelligence gathering. You stop being the target and become the observer. You stop reacting emotionally and start responding strategically. The manipulator who tries to make you feel inadequate, they're revealing their own insecurity. The person who uses your kindness against you, they're showing you they have none themselves. The individual who weaponizes your emotions, they're demonstrating their own emotional bankruptcy. See the projection, and you see through the manipulation entirely. Truth number 4, Jung discovered something that should terrify and empower you equally. Beneath your individual psychology exists the collective unconscious, universal patterns, archetypes, and psychological structures shared by all humanity. This means manipulation isn't creative. It's repetitive. Every manipulator throughout human history has been running the same fundamental scripts. They're just archetypal patterns playing out through different personalities. Once you recognize these patterns, manipulation becomes predictable. You've seen it before, not in this lifetime necessarily, but in the deep psychological inheritance you carry. The tyrant archetype uses intimidation and threat. The seducer uses desire and promise. The victim uses guilt and obligation. The sage uses supposed wisdom and authority. Every manipulator is channeling one of these archetypal patterns. Here's the power move. When you study these archetypes, consciously, when you understand the psychological playbook that's been running for thousands of years, you develop pattern recognition that operates faster than conscious thought. Someone starts manipulating you, and before they finish their first sentence, your unconscious has already identified the archetype, predicted the next 7 moves, and prepared the counter-strategy. This is why Jung studied mythology, fairy tales, and ancient wisdom. He wasn't being academic. He was creating a manipulation defense system based on universal psychological patterns. The manipulator thinks they're being clever and original, but you can see they're just running archetype pattern number 3, which has been documented in human psychology for 5,000 years. You're not just defending against this individual. You're defending against a pattern that you've inherited. The counter-strategy for your collective unconscious is a library of every manipulation that's ever been attempted against humans. Learn to access it, and you become essentially unmanipulable. Truth number 5. This is Jung's ultimate teaching, and the one that brings everything together. Individuation. Individuation is the process of becoming psychologically whole, integrating your shadow, loosening your persona, understanding projection, accessing the collective unconscious, and developing what Jung called the self, with a capital S. The individuated person cannot be manipulated because they have no psychological hooks for manipulation to grab onto. They've integrated their darkness, so you can't shame them. They're not identified with their social masks, so you can't threaten their reputation. They understand projection, so your manipulative tactics just reveal your own wounds. They recognize archetypal patterns, so your unique approach is actually predictable. But here's what makes individuation truly powerful. It's not about becoming invulnerable by building walls. It's about becoming invulnerable through radical self-knowledge and psychological integration. The individuated person appears more open, not less. They seem more vulnerable, not more defended. But it's a paradox. Their apparent openness comes from genuine strength, not weakness. They can afford to be open because there's nothing you can exploit. They can afford to be vulnerable because they're not actually at risk. Jung observed that most people spend their entire lives being who others expect them to be. They're psychologically colonized, their thoughts, behaviors, and identities shaped entirely by external influences. They're manipulation victims before anyone even tries to manipulate them, because they've already been manipulated by society into becoming hollow vessels, with no authentic core individuation. Is the process of psychological decolonization. It's reclaiming your mind from every influence that's shaped you without your conscious consent. It's becoming the author of your own psychology rather than the character in someone else's script. And here's the beautiful truth. Once you've individuated, manipulation doesn't just become ineffective, it becomes obvious. You can spot it instantly because it's trying to influence a structure that no longer exists. It's like watching someone try to push a door that's been removed. The effort is visible, but there's nothing there to move. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But I'll add this, becoming who you truly are isn't just a privilege. It's a defense system. It's psychological sovereignty. It's the difference between being moved through life by invisible forces and moving through life as a conscious agent of your own will. Individuation doesn't make you immune to all influence. That would be psychopathy. But it makes you immune to manipulation, which is influence without your conscious consent. You maintain the ability to be influenced by truth, beauty, love, and wisdom, while becoming completely resistant to tactics designed to exploit your psychological vulnerabilities. So let me paint you 2 pictures. In the first, you continue as you are. You remain vulnerable to manipulation because you haven't integrated your shadow. You're identified with your persona. You don't recognize projection. You're blind to archetypal patterns, and you haven't begun the process of individuation. You'll continue being exploited, subtly, constantly, in ways you barely notice until the damage is done. You'll keep agreeing to things that don't serve you. You'll keep being guided by invisible hands toward outcomes others desire. In the second picture, you've implemented these 5 truths. You've done the uncomfortable work of integrating your darkness. You've loosened your grip on your social masks. You've developed the ability to see through projection instantly. You recognize archetypal manipulation patterns the moment they emerge. And you've begun the journey of individuation, becoming psychologically whole and sovereign. In this second reality, something remarkable happens. People start treating you differently. The manipulators in your life either disappear or suddenly become respectful, not because you're aggressive or hostile, but because on some unconscious level, they sense there's nothing to exploit. You've become psychologically expensive. The effort required to manipulate you exceeds any possible benefit. You walk through the world differently. Conversations that used to leave you drained and confused now reveal themselves as transparent manipulation attempts that you navigate effortlessly. Relationships that used to trap you now show themselves clearly for what they are. Opportunities that used to be dressed up as obligations become easy to decline. But here's what I need you to understand. This transformation doesn't happen through passive learning. You can't just know these principles intellectually. You have to implement them. You have to do the shadow work. You have to examine your persona. You have to practice seeing projection. You have to study the archetypes. You have to commit to the individuation process. And I'll be honest with you, most people won't do this work. They'll watch this video, feel temporarily empowered, and then go right back to their manipulable patterns. They'll choose the comfort of their psychological vulnerabilities over the discomfort of transformation. But you, something brought you to this video. Some part of you, perhaps your own unconscious, recognize that you're ready for this knowledge, that you're tired of being psychologically exploited, that you're prepared to become the kind of person that manipulation can't touch. Jung spent his entire life developing these principles. I've spent years distilling them into practical application. The question now is, what will you do with them? If this video has given you even a glimpse of your own psychological power, do me a favor. Like this video so more people can discover these truths. Subscribe because we're going deeper into psychological sovereignty with every video I create. And comment below telling me which of these 5 truths resonated most powerfully with you. Because here's the reality. While you've been taught to be vulnerable, others have been taught to exploit. While you've been programmed for compliance, others have been programmed for dominance. The game has always been rigged, but now you know the rules. It becomes impossible to manipulate. Become psychologically sovereign. Become individuated. Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. Choose wisely."